Senate candidate Abdul El Sayed inviting Hassan Piker to a rally yesterday, refusing to condemn any of Piker's pathetic beliefs.
Are there any views that Hassan holds that you disavow?
I'm not here to disavow people's views. This whole gotcha game, platform policing, cancel culture, I thought we were over it.
Remember the kind of hell that President Trump had to pay for having dinner with Nick Fuentes.
Yeah.
And that's caused a huge fracturing on the right. And now all of them are fighting amongst each other, and I can't even figure it out.
I mean, CNN had this guy on.
And he's saying what Dana was saying, which he thinks that Israel's response is not proportionate to what was done to Israelis.
He has
Not
no right to say that.
Right, then you should just not like him. And a lot of people don't like him.
But you do?
But it's not really a like or don't like thing. I think
Think
that
he's handsome? Is that it?
he's objectively handsome. Look at the New York Times profile of him.
My queen. My queen.
I'm going to take a hard pass on it.
The thing about this is I kind of liked his answer to it. He goes, I don't think we want to get into platform policing and cancel culture. I agree with that. So if this guy wants to run and win, he thinks this guy could help him win, give it a shot. Give it a shot in Michigan. You know what? Right. I respect it. Own it.
What?
This could cost you huge. But if that's how you really feel, do it. I really don't care. Things have changed. People say all kinds of stuff now. And
oh, my God.
We just have to say, this is some crazy guy, but I like him. He might be too crazy for you. He might be obnoxious and disgusting. But you know what? I'm going to run with this guy. And if I win, I win. If I lose, it might be a little bit his fault. And it's your fault for the bad judgment. It's all about judgment.
Wait, I think Jesse literally believes that I'm a misogynist, so he's now offering respect.
What if your salary, no matter how much you make, is actually the wrong way to think about your place in the economy? Let's get into it.
So this is the big question our source material poses today. It basically asks us to consider that all the usual things we use to measure success, fancy job title, the number on your paycheck, might just be distracting us from a much deeper reality.
Okay, so our first section gets right to the heart of it, rethinking your economic identity. The argument from our source is that we really need to look past the numbers we earn to actually understand where we stand in the grand scheme of things. And boom, here it is, the core argument from our source. It claims that whether you're making minimum wage or 6 figures a year is, and I'm quoting here, neither here nor there. What really matters from this perspective isn't how much you earn, but which of two fundamental classes you belong to. So this naturally leads us to what the text presents as the central conflict, a society split into two main groups, the worker on one side and the owner on the other. Let's unpack what the source actually means by these terms.
So first up, you've got the proletariat. According to the source, this is the working class. And it's a broad definition. It's not just people with a 9-to-5, but also includes the unemployed or anyone who relies on welfare instead of private wealth. This whole group is what the text calls the lower class rank.
And then on the other side of that coin, we have the bourgeoisie. The source defines this group as the ruling class. And the key difference here is that their money doesn't come from working for a wage. It comes from owning things. They're either employers or they just live off their investments and private capital.
Yeah, and this slide really lays it all out, right? It shows that fundamental split. You've got the proletariat on the left who work for a wage, and on the right, the bourgeoisie, who get their profit from that labor. The source argues this isn't some ladder you can just easily climb, but a core conflict of interest that's just built into the system.
For them. But, it's never that black and white, is it? The source points out this really fascinating third position, someone who's kind of stuck right in the middle of that big divide. And their existence, it's defined by a pretty major contradiction. And this is what the source calls the contradictory position. Let's paint a picture here. Think about a small farmer. This person is out there working their own fields, getting their hands dirty, but they also hire a couple of field hands to help out. See? They're basically living in two different worlds at the exact same time. So let's unpack that a little. And this is where you really see the conflict, the pull. On one hand, they're doing their own work, right? Just like any other worker. But on the other hand, because they own the farm, they're also taking some of the value from the labor of their employees, just like an owner. So they're not really one or the other. They're kind of floating in this in-between transitional space. Okay, so to really get how all of this connects, this framework says we have to ask a super important question. Where does wealth actually come from? And this is presented as a critical revelation. And it might sound kind of obvious when you say it out loud, but this is the absolute core of the argument. Wealth isn't magic, right? It doesn't just pop out of thin air or grow on trees. It doesn't even just materialize from a great idea. It has a real, specific, tangible source. And this quote really nails that idea. The source is arguing that wealth is created by people. Simple as that. It's all the value that gets generated from the time, the effort, the skill, all the things that workers pour into their jobs every single day. So that begs the question, right? If the workers are the ones creating all this value, how does it end up as wealth for the owners? Well, the mechanism described here has a name: extraction. It's basically the process where ownership gives someone the power to capture the value that was created by somebody else's work. And this extraction happens in a couple of main ways. You've got the most obvious one, of course, direct employment, the classic boss and employee setup. But the source also points out these more indirect ways, like owning private capital or stocks. That's a way you can profit from someone's labor without ever even having to meet them. So, here's where it all comes together. The framework argues that once you really wrap your head around this idea, this whole concept of wealth creation and extraction, you're suddenly faced with a choice. It's like you're standing at a fork in the road, and there are 3 very different paths you can decide to walk down. All right, so here are those 3 paths. Path 1 is basically acceptance. You see how the system works, and you just accept it. You try to make the best of it, get the best position you can. Path 2, that's deciding to become an owner. You decide, okay, I'm going to play this game, and I'm going to win. You aim to be the one doing the extracting. The source has a pretty harsh term for this: a class trader. Then there's path 3. You reject the game entirely. You look at the system and say, nope, this isn't right, and you decide to work to change it. And the text labels this path as becoming a communist or something broadly leftist. Okay, so that third path, it uses a word that's, let's be honest, pretty loaded for a lot of people. So it's super important we clarify exactly how this source material defines it. It's not just one thing. It's presented as both a process and an end goal. So according to this text, communism has 2 parts. First, it's the actual work, the day in, day out process of trying to bring about the liberation of the working class. But it's also the name for the new society that all that work is trying to create. So yeah, you can really think of it as 2 sides of the very same coin. You've got the process, which is the ongoing struggle for change, and then you have the end goal, which is a radically different type of society. The one described here is classless, moneyless, and stateless.
Okay, but the source adds a really important layer here. It argues that even though all workers in the proletariat are part of this system of value extraction, what it calls exploitation, some groups experience it on a much deeper and more severe level.
And to make this less abstract, the text gives some very specific examples. It points to people like migrant workers and sex workers, but it especially highlights gig workers, people who have to provide their own equipment, like their cars or tools, as being among the most oppressed within this larger working class.
To our final section today, which explores what happens when a worker makes that third choice. It's about adopting a whole new identity. The author has this interesting phrase for this whole realization. They call it bad good news. It's bad because, it pulls back the curtain on a pretty harsh reality, but it's good because it gives a kind of clarity. And once you have that clarity, you can't really go back to not knowing.
So, for the author, taking action on this newfound understanding, it becomes a question of self-respect. This quote really gets to it. I must express myself to respect myself. The idea is that to see the world this way and then just stay quiet would be like betraying yourself.
So this whole journey that we've followed, from rethinking your identity, to seeing the system, to facing this big choice, it all builds to one final really powerful conclusion from the author.
And there it is. The ultimate takeaway from the source is that for a worker who goes through this whole process, communism stops being just a political idea. It becomes, in the author's own words, a celebration of their identity as a worker. Are your core beliefs really a choice? I mean, really? It's an idea that kind of turns our whole way of thinking about identity and politics on its head. Let's get into it. Wow. The piece just kicks off with this line right here. It immediately sets up this divide, right, between 2 very different groups, and this is the key, it also hints that maybe they're not so different after all. This one sentence totally sets the stage for everything that follows.
So, you're probably thinking, how on earth could these two groups be connected? Well, here's where the author's argument really gets going. They suggest that, even though the labels are completely different, the feeling of being under pressure from the powers that be, that can be exactly the same. The real heart of it all is the difference between the raw experience and the story we tell ourselves about it.
Okay, look at how this breaks down. On one level, the gut level, the experience, it's the same stuff. Paranoia, feeling like you're always being watched by the system, but the interpretation, that's where they completely diverge. One side sees it through a political lens, like I am in opposition to the state. The other sees it through a social one, like this is systemic bias at work.
Right, so the big takeaway here is that what happens to you might be similar to what happens to someone else. But the meaning you give it, the story you build around it, that's what makes all the difference. And this whole idea, the split between feeling and understanding, it's basically the launchpad for a much, much bigger question.
And boom, this is where we get to the absolute core of it, the part that really makes you think. It's a full-on challenge to this idea we all kind of have, that we have total free will, that we can just choose who we want to be.
I mean, just listen to this question. It's a lot, right? It really makes you stop and think. Can you just turn your feelings off, pick a new set of beliefs, ditch your values when they're not working for you anymore? Can you really just choose your side? Is it really that simple, like picking what to wear in the morning? Or is there something deeper going on here?
So after a question that heavy, you'd expect a complicated answer, right? Well, the author doesn't beat around the bush. They give us their own answer. And it's pretty surprising. Just no. For this writer, the whole idea that you can just shop for your core beliefs is, it's a fantasy. They're saying some identities are just too deep, too fundamental to be treated like something you can just swap out. So why the hard no? Well, it all comes down to this idea of the worker identity. And we got to be super clear here. They're not just talking about having a 9-to-5 job. Not at all. For them, worker is a political identity. It's a fundamental state of being marginalized in a capitalist system. And the key thing is, you don't choose it, you just recognize that it's what you are. It's like the foundation for their entire way of thinking.
Okay, so if this identity isn't a choice, that changes everything, right? The stakes get way, way higher. If you can't just walk away from it, what happens when you try to? What happens when you pretend you can? The author calls this the price of normalcy.
And this quote, man, it just lays out the stakes perfectly. For the author, trying to fit in, trying to become normal, isn't some self-help journey. No, it's a political act. It's a betrayal. It means you're literally turning your back on every single person who's in the same boat as you.
So here's how they wrap up their reasoning. For them, to stop being a communist, which is all tied up in this worker identity, it's not like quitting a book club. It would mean giving up your dignity, your self-respect. It would be a total betrayal of your people. And here's the kicker. They even wonder if it's actually possible to change, or if it would just be an act, just a performance, hiding who you really are underneath.
And that brings us to the very end of the piece. After all this really personal, intense reflection, the author kind of pivots and turns the spotlight back on us, the reader. They leave us with one last bit of advice.
And what's so cool about this is they're not telling you to believe what they believe. Not at all. Instead, the final message is really a challenge for you, for me, for all of us, to look inward. The journey is yours, but where you start, that's everything.
And that's where it leaves us, hanging on that question. After digging into all this stuff about identity, politics, and choice, the real challenge isn't to adopt the author's answers. It's to figure out what your own questions are. So think about it. What are the things that define you, that feel less like a choice and more like just a fundamental part of who you are? And what would it cost you to walk away from them? That's the real question, isn't it?
Of students lined up and packed into these rallies, and they ate up the anti-war, anti-capitalist, and anti-establishment messages from both Piker and El Sayed.
I don't think it's too far left. I think the Democratic Party has gone so far right.
Democratic Party was also against Zoran campaigning with Hassan, and we see how that went.
I think that they're really just trying to shut down Abdul's race early, because I don't think they want another Zoran, and I think that they see Hassan as a way to do that because of his, statements that are framed as controversial.
Boom. Hassan Abiheads, you made me proud. Those are great quotes. Those are bars, baby. Let's go. We have to be a little bit more bold. We have to demand that our politicians are more bold as well. They need to demonstrate conviction. They need to demonstrate courage. They need to demonstrate their moral compass. When you look at the politicians that are some of the most successful, some of the most popular politicians, you see that moral conviction. You see that stubbornness. Bernie Sanders, even Zoran Mamdani to a certain degree. And they are rewarded. They're showered with praise. And it might take a while for people to start recognizing that these politicians were right, like Bernie was right. It might take a while for people who have voted against Bernie Sanders, who thought Bernie Sanders was a malignant force in Democratic Party politics because they ruined the chances of their favorite candidates, the establishment liberals, the centrists, the center-right figures. But eventually, defeat after defeat causes them to really reconsider. And that's what we're seeing in the base of the party right now. And that's precisely why people are attacking me. In their minds, they think I'm a singular force. I'm not. I'm not alone. I can stand on my values. I can stand on my convictions and continue doing what I'm doing because I'm not alone.